Hey everyone, my name is Tim Blank. I wear a lot of hats in the game design community. I am primarily known for board games. I call myself #1 a board game designer, and then everything else I do in the community is kind of a subset of that. I'm here right now. I'm as the president of the Game Makers Guild, which is a board game design community. We are, as far as I know, the largest one in the world that gets together and meets regularly and plays each other's games. At least, meets more than just like once a year. And we've got about at any given time between 50 and 100 active members. And yeah, we meet right here in Boston, but we've got chapters all around the US. We've got one in Philadelphia. We've got one in Nashville. We got a pretty awesome one in New Haven, which you'll hear a little bit more about shortly. And yeah, so that's Game Makers Guild. I also am a vice president for BostonFIG. I oversee the tabletop showcase, so I really try to take some of my community building stuff to that. I'm a founding member of the Boston Gamers, that's GAYMERS, which is an LGBT gaming group of individuals who just get together and have fun and play games. And I also teach game design at Northeastern. So yeah, got a lot of different hats going on in this game community, but I think I know a little bit about helping to build game communities. So Matt,
talk about hats. The two of us, we really cover a lot of bases here. So I'm Matt Fantastic. I first and foremost own a creative studio where we do game design. We also art direct projects, and we'll do graphic design, creating print ready files. We'll do everything from concept to print ready. We also do a lot of sort of gamified activations and creative consulting with companies like Netflix and Yale. And then I also own Elm City Games, which is a game shop and library and membership community. I also publish games with Killjoy, Sex Plus, and Prettiest Princess, where I have various hats there. Mostly just small weird stuff on the publishing side. I also am the founder of the New Haven Game Makers Guild. Tim convinced us to affiliate our little design group with the greater GMG, and it's been great. We'll talk about that in a second. I also teach game design as an adjunct at a number of different universities, and I run a playtesting convention, or I did pre-COVID, and we'll hopefully get back to that again in 2022. Probably some other stuff. Collectively, I think we do everything except run a distributor.
Yeah, but you do a lot with manufacturing, so.
I do manufacture a lot of stuff. I used to be a print broker, so I know a lot about that. But that is not what we are here to talk about. Today, we are here to talk about building a design community. So real quick, can you raise your hand, which is one of these little...
It's the number 6.
Number 6. If you are digital only rather than tabletop. Cool. So some of what we talk about is going to be irrelevant to you, but a lot of what we talk about will be very relevant to you. New Haven Game Makers Guild in particular. Oh no, that dude just bailed. he's like, all right, fuck those guys.
I mean, I think a lot of what we talk about is just going to be relevant to community building in general, not necessarily just games, but we are going to give it that kind of lens, right?
Exactly. New Haven Game Makers Guild, actually, we've done a good deal of outreach and bringing in digital gamers. Another thing that I do actually is I'm on the board of Game Dev CT. And that is, I am sort of like the token tabletop creator in that space. And so we do a lot of events and organizing around that, that group. So, something that's related to this is, the analog versus digital world. And a lot of people in both tabletop, especially now with COVID, as well as, obviously the digital world, are very connected and aware of remote communities, but are not necessarily as plugged into the value of a physical group. So Tim, why don't you talk a little bit about sort of like what is great about everybody getting together in a physical space and kind of meeting up?
Yeah, getting together physically. So that is how Game Makers Guild originally started up here in Boston. Is that it was a group of in-person designers who would get together, and we'd play each other's games. It's board games, so you'd sit down at a table around with other individuals and play the games. There's a lot of really good benefits to that, and I think something that it's going to be hard to talk about it without contrasting it to digital communities. But I think the biggest thing is that there's a connection that you have with other individuals when you are there in person and you are face to face with them. You're looking at them across the table, when you're giving them feedback, when you're being critical of their work. There's just something about physically being present that I think really helps to get others to understand that we're all on the same page here. We're all helping each other, trying to make their game as best as possible. And we're not just kind of coming here to be a troll. Like, we took the time out to travel to this space, to sit down and to play your game. And it's not just something we're doing off the cuff. Like, we're here to legitimately help you to design that game, and you're here to legitimately help me design this game. And so I think just being in person has that kind of aura to it. I also think that there's just a lot more that happens with, when we're talking about building communities, we're talking about building friendships. We're talking about, making relationships, and a lot of that happens either in the time, leading up to when you start the game design aspect of your community, and also after, when we're all leaving together and we all realize, like, oh, we're all jumping on the red line together. All right. So, you sit down on the train and you talk as you're leaving. Yeah.
I was gonna jump in before you go too far beyond what I was gonna jump in on. If you think about like convention play, right? We're at the Boston Festival of Indie Games. A lot of you come to the physical space, right? And so if you think about that same thing, there is that value, like Tim said, of seeing real people, looking at faces, having those conversations. Digital spaces are wonderful, and we're going to talk about that as well. But I do really encourage people, even in the digital space, to look at involving yourself and or helping create and shepherd a physical meetup group. It's pretty easy to bring a gaming laptop to show something off, or bring your Switch if you have stuff up on there with like dev kit stuff, and sitting around. Exactly, there's just something so much more social and connected when you get to sit around with people. Plus, I feel like you feel less out there. When you are with other people, you're like, oh man, there's like people here. This is pretty cool. As opposed to existing in what can feel like a vacuum.
Yeah, I'll throw in there too. This is something that I encourage all my students, because most of my students are digital. They're looking to do digital game design, and so I come from the tabletop perspective, and so I throw out there to all of my students. I'm having them go out there and become part of the amazing Boston game design community that we have, with all of our different meetups and groups that we have, and encouraging them to go there in person. Because if you are playtesting even a digital game, to be there in person, to watch your playtesters actually play the game, look at their faces and see how they react to certain parts of your game, to be there to feel their emotions as they're playing, that's going to be so much better feedback that you have than you would if they just played it online and then typed up a report for you at the end, which, those are absolutely valuable. But, I'm someone, when I'm playtesting my games, I also am trying to get attuned to my players' emotions and how they're reacting to certain aspects of the game.
Yeah, super agree on that. This is not a panel about playtesting, but real quick, something that I think is important and a great value is paraphrasing Neil Gaiman talking about writing, that when somebody tells you something is wrong, they're almost always, right. But if they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. So, being able to interact with playtesters in a way that's not just getting a feedback form later is huge. So talking, I feel like we've established a little bit about why communities are helpful, why an analog community can be really useful. But, so let's say really practical, we're starting an organization. We want to start a playtesting group. We want to start a community, or we want to participate in one, like what should we expect in terms of sort of the official organization and structure? And, like, do we start a nonprofit? Do we just keep it like, I don't know, we're just kind of hanging out. We're a bunch of people that do whatever. Are you a volunteer run organization, or do you have like an actual sort of leadership structure? And what are you getting yourself in for when you do these things? So, Tim, how did GMG start? I mean, because now you definitely have a bit more of a formal, you're not a nonprofit, but you have a bit more formal structure with a president and, various kind of like specific roles. Was that something you started with, or was that something that you grew into, and why did you end up there?
Yeah, it's something that we grew into. And so I'm just going to underpin this entire answer with, when it comes to looking at how you're going to organize your group, do what works for your group. Don't try to force a structure. You might have, just 15 individuals who are coming together to design games with each other. And so you might not need that formal structure. Don't try to force it. It's going to make it awkward, and it's going to make people kind of feel like, oh, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. So do what works for your group. As far as Game Makers Guild started, I actually was not around when it started. I've been a part of it for maybe about 7 years now, but it had started about 10 years ago. And from my understanding, it was just a bunch of designers who did regularly get together and were making board games, but they wanted to make something a little bit more formal, and they wanted to put something out there for the rest of the game design community to just get different eyes on their games, to have people looking at their games through different lenses as they were playtesting. One of the original organizers was on the board for the Cambridge Innovation Center, and so they had this space that they could go to and playtest each other's games. So they started doing it once a month. Eventually, as more people started showing up, the group started growing and things started getting a little bit more formalized, where they had leadership. And then, we actually have some financial stuff that we deal with. So we have a treasurer, and then we have leadership on a bunch of different other initiatives that we have coming out of the group. But it started as just a bunch of people getting together, wanting to have fun and make games with each other. And it grew into something, a lot more formal. We started finding that we needed to meet more than once a month. So now we're meeting every 2 weeks, and we're utilizing local colleges here in Boston to do that. And so we're kind of, this last year, we've gone all completely online with Discord. So we're kind of changing with whatever the needs of the group are. And we've done that in our leadership structure as well. I mean, we are not a nonprofit, but we are part of BostonFIG. So we do get some of those benefits there, though we don't really, pull in on them much. But we do have, something a little bit more formal. We have leadership. We have a membership opportunity for our members, where they pay $50 a year. They get a shirt or a playtesting notebook. One of the Fail Faster notebooks. I'm sure you're familiar with them, Matt. And, they get to come and they get to support the community. And it's one of those things where our members like to support our community because they do find value in it. And so as we start to make changes to it, it's really, where are our members going to find the most value? Members needed leadership at one point. We wanted to have this membership opportunity, and there's a curation process that we have to get the Game Makers Guild seal of approval. Members wanted that, so we pivoted to make sure that that was going to be a thing. And really just, listening to our membership and what they want and what they need, and giving that to them.
Yeah, so I think that's huge, because it's great to contrast it with what we do at New Haven Game Makers Guild, where we are just like pure anarchy. Part of that is probably our personalities, as sort of like the de facto, or, well, you're officially a leader. I'm sort of a de facto leader. And again, it really speaks to the value in listening to your membership, listening to the community, listening to the people that are engaging with what you're trying to do and to meet their needs. And we have a smaller community. New Haven is, a third of the size of Boston proper, and then we don't have a bunch of suburbs surrounding us full of people like Cambridge and whatever. So we are significantly smaller in terms of the pool of people that we would pull from. Of course, you also have the benefit in Boston of a ton of universities. We do have Yale, which is the top private university in the U.S.
Bostonians are like, nah, we got Harvard.
I don't go to that place, but fuck Boston, fuck Harvard, right? Like, no, Harvard Business, Yale Law, right? Is the move. But listen, we don't have a whole lot we got pizza and Yale, so I'm going to be protective of that. But so, for us, it's a much looser thing. We do meet weekly. We have a weekly Wednesday meeting, and then we have a monthly, all day Saturday thing. Plus we do one-offs and different things like that. Like I said, we run a playtesting convention, but our membership is much more all over the place. Our membership is less, our membership is a mixed level of totally amateur, never did anything, to sort of like working hobbyist up to full-time professionals. But we just we have yet to feel a need to have a super formal structure. We all just get together and everybody plays each other's stuff. And so that seems to work best for us at this stage. But again, we're going to stay responsive. And so, I guess the big takeaway is that do whatever your members want. Do whatever is going to help each other the most. And as you're growing, continually reflect on that. Continually talk to people. Don't feel like you need to follow one path or another. If you're more organized, you're somehow a better organization. Or if you're less organized, you're somehow a cooler, freer organization or whatever. Like, none of that is true. It's really just coming together and doing things in a way that's going to be the most successful and give everyone the most.
Yeah, Matt, I remember you coming to me to be like, hey, so, we're creating this group. We're thinking of being part of GMG. Like, what do we need? Like, do we need a structure? Do we need logos? Do we need all this stuff? And I think my exact response to you was whatever works for the people that you have. Because, like I said, don't try to force people into some kind of structure or some kind of playtesting, method that doesn't work for them, because that's how they leave, not how they keep coming back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny. We were going for a little bit, and it was like, oh, like maybe we should affiliate. Yeah, it's exactly that. Like, oh, Game Makers Guild. Okay, like what's that about? That's cool branding. And now we got this cool network. It's continued to grow, more and more chapters. If anybody here is not local to Boston, good for you, because fuck Boston. However, if you want to get a group going, start a Game Makers Guild, right? I think everybody involved in Game Makers Guild wants to see more of that, wants to keep building that network. The two of us have been hounding a woman who could not join us today, unfortunately, but was supposed to be on the panel, about the group that she organizes out in Seattle. And we're like, you should be a GMG. That'd be pretty cool. Like, you should, come on, do it. But, I think everything is, the more collectivized it is, the better, right? The more we're there, the more we're able to get stuff out of what we're looking for. So I'm going to go off order of my script here, just because I think this is going to flow more naturally, is talking about different types of content and programming that you may have in your community. So the sort of obvious, easy one that I think everybody's going to have is playtesting. If you make games, you need playtesters. And you always need more. No matter how many you have, you need more. No matter how many you play tested, you probably want to do more, right? And I'm not one of these people, you need to play test it 10,000 times and blah, blah, blah. But if you're a game designer, you wish you have more play testers. And so getting together and, kind of play testing each other's stuff is just a core central thing. And it is a great way to help build membership, because anyone that's designing is like, oh, there's this cool resource. Let me go be a part of it. So I think playtesting is a slam dunk, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But what other events and types of things We do. So I know Boston, you guys do a bit more structured events as well. So, like what else do you have going on?
Yeah, so first I want to just add a little bit to the playtesting thing that you said. Playtesting is the core of what we do. And so we have gone through ebbs and flows with Game Makers Guild, but always, always, always when we meet, we playtest. Like that will never go away. That is the heart of the playtesting group. I mean, we're a playtesting group, so if we're not playtesting, then we're not that anymore. But yeah, so that's really important that as you're looking at creating a group or growing a group, that you know at your core what you are, and you make sure that you never get rid of that. And so for us, it's playtesting. As far as other things that we do, we've had a lot of other initiatives that come and go. Currently, one thing that we've been doing, especially, it's been made a lot easier because of COVID. We've pivoted online, and we've got our own Discord server going, and through that, we've been having some online events where we're bringing in people from all around the country and all around the world to talk about the game design community. So we're hosting some panels, and I know, Matt, you were on one or two of them when we were talking about, some of our panels are about networking in game design. Some of our panels are about best practices for playtesting, working with games media in order to make sure that you're setting the right expectations with them, running Kickstarters or other forms of funding. We're doing all of these kind of events where we're pulling in people who are experts in the community, who for them, it's just, I jump on a Discord or a Zoom call for 1 to 2 hours and talk about this on a random Monday night. Absolutely. So we've really been able to kind of get that up and going. We have a playtesting program that we call Playtesting for Publishers, where we're reaching out to local publishers to say, we've got this built-in game design community, a bunch of just game designers who get together. We'll playtest some of your games for you, and that helps us with networking. And really just networking in general. It's done a little bit more off the cuff because we don't have like formal networking events, but when we're traveling together, and that's a big thing that we do, is we go to conventions together because we all live near each other. So we're gonna hotel share, or we'll jump in a car and you get 4 designers who are in the car. Now I'm not driving the entire 16 hours to Gen Con. I'm only driving 4 of those 16 hours, and you travel together, and then you hang out together when you're at conventions. And so someone that I might know, you now know them, and someone you may have known first, I now know them. And it just builds, the bigger board game or game design community just through knowing people and knowing the events that are coming up. We have one member, Jeff, who just for whatever reason knows every single little event that's happening, between here and probably Pennsylvania, and organizes a bunch of people to get together to go to them every time one of those events happens. And that's how you get to know people. That's how you get to become someone in the community, and someone that, publishers, when they know you, they'll sit down and listen to you and take your pitch and talk to you about games and, help to grow you as a designer as well. What else are you doing?
Oh, I was going to say, one of the coolest things for me is, like walking around at a PAX or whatever, especially with some of our digital designers, we were just like, oh man, like that enormous thing in this giant screen is showing this game that, we were looking at a year ago or more, kind of playing these crappy, alpha versions. And it's really, really fun to see people in the community blowing stuff up.
Yeah, it's great. Like in board games, you walk into Target, you walk into Barnes and Noble, and you're like, that game, that's my friend, that made that, and I traveled with him, and I've known him for years, and all that.
Yeah. So in New Haven, sticking with our sort of looseness, we tried to do more formal events, and it just didn't really stick super hard. And it was a little frustrating for me and a couple other people that are trying to organize them. But we realized that maybe that's not our vibe at the moment. For us, it's interesting because we tend to do a lot of that stuff more informally. So we will not necessarily have an educational, like, hey, we're going to talk about this stuff, but we're hanging out, and then two of us start talking about a thing, and people are like, listening, and it's conversational because our like I said, our group is significantly smaller than Boston. So when there's 10 or 15 of us together, it's a lot easier to have these kind of quasi-educational conversations around stuff, versus here's more of a presentation situation. And in terms of like networking, I'm a firm believer that the best networking is natural and just happens when you're doing other stuff. And so again, for us, it's Boston doesn't do this either. Most groups that exist don't do a sort of formal networking thing. I think that's generally just feels weird. Do fun stuff, and that'll turn into something. We meet at Elm City Games in New Haven, which extra bonus point, since I own it, we can kind of do whatever, and we don't have to pay for it, and we got all this space, and it's pretty nice. But we are also across the street from Barcade. And so like we have a lot of, under normal circumstances, pre-COVID, we have a lot of casual hanging out. It's like, hey, we're kind of done playtesting. Like, let's go across the street, have some beers, play some pinball, and hang out more. And, that's huge. Because again, just knowing that there are other designers, just kind of hanging out with other people that are facing similar issues and similar problems and thinking about similar stuff, it's just really nice. Not even in a formal, I'm asking for advice way, but just blah, 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 we're talking about this, this other thing. And it's nice to have other people too that you can talk about all of this with, and not bother other people in your life that are maybe tired of hearing about, whatever, design problem you're having. Something we do that Boston does not is we do a yearly playtesting convention. It is also not really big, but it has grown a bit. But keeping with our anarchaic structure,
we go to it though.
Yeah. Keeping with our sort of vibe. I started running it and put it together specifically because I didn't want an organized convention. So there's something like Metatopia, or some other shows where there is a much more structured playtesting vibe. There's much more of a do this, and you're going to schedule this and schedule that. And I found that some of the best moments are these casual moments where you're all sticking together. We were in between things, and five of us all got together and are looking at something, and it's like, we have to go do this, we have to do that, and we're like in the middle of having this wonderful discussion or playtest or whatever. And so we basically organize it around just a weekend of hanging out, playing games. and it's great. Again, people, for those, like, people will bring in like big rigs if they got digital stuff sometimes, and other people are bringing in bigger things because they're going to set up. But it's really just a way for everybody to get together and connect on games. So doing that kind of convention thing can be really great. We also do guest visits a fair bit, where we have a lot of friends that are designers, sometimes from the Boston area. Sometimes there's a lot of people in New York. There's other friends that may be traveling through for whatever reason, and they'll come by. And we do a lot of, like, this designer's going to be here, like, come hang out. And that really is exciting because you get to see what people that you're not used to are working on. They bring their own kind of energy and vibe and experiences from whatever groups they may have been involved with or are involved with. Like Playtest NYC is a really great group. And guest visits, it gets people fired up too, because it's like, oh man, like, people are traveling around with their games, right? So I'm a huge fan of the guest visit stuff as well.
Yeah, I'd say there's one other thing, and this might be a segue into the playtesting stuff you were talking about, that we do here in Boston that I'm a huge fan of. And so this could be like a goal for other playtesting communities, is we have what we call the curation process. So we have set up process that games can go through to get specific kinds of play testing. So it usually starts with just initial play testing, and then we do intensive play testing where we get the same group of people to play a game over and over and over and over and over again, in order to give like more of that, like more detailed feedback on it. We do rulebook play testing as well, where you put a game in front of someone and you see if they can play it based on your rules. And then we also have the final stage of it is expert play testing, where we find people who are your target market, who are well-known designers or who have, are just really good at what they do, to sit down and play your game and give you kind of that more high-level feedback. It's something at the end of that, once you've gotten through all of it, that's how you get the Game Makers Guild seal of approval. And it's a process that we started, I want to say maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And it's something that has really helped a lot of our designers to develop their game. It's a formalized play testing process, but it's really helped them to develop their game into something, from taking this good game and making it like, this is a fucking awesome game. So.
Yeah, something else actually that I think is really neat that you do is at BFIG, and I want to talk about expanding this, is a little plaque that says like, Game Maker Guild member at people's booths. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. And actually, I want to talk about doing that at other shows. That we should do a generic Game Maker. Well, we'll talk about that later. But
we can. But that was actually, so the reason I do that is because that's how I joined Game Makers Guild. So I went to BostonFIG in 2014, and I was looking around and I saw all of these games that were there were designers that were Game Makers Guild designers, and I was like, well, I'm making a board game, so why don't I just check this place out? And if those signs weren't up, I would have never known to that this was a thing. So I make sure of it. We have our shirts too, so that way you can ask others about the group and all of that. So it's all marketing for us, but it makes you part of a community. When you're at a convention, when you're at something like BostonFIG, where you can see there are all of these 12, 15 games that are Game Makers Guild games, and you're like, this is a legit community here, not just someone who's randomly putting a sign up in their booth.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's that sense of community, right? Is just such a huge foundational thing, and people love seeing that stuff. So before we jump into talking about playtesting, because that's going to involve some stuff about giving and receiving feedback. This is something that I usually like to get to a little bit earlier when talking about things like this, but here we are, trying to flow natural flow, and that is policies and guidelines and rules. And so I think that is crucially important, even for a small, loose organization like we are. We have a very developed and clearly stated set of policies, guidelines, and rules. So talking about that, I think that it's really important to make the distinction between rules and guidelines, especially. So guidelines are kind of like, hey, you should do this. This is the better way to do it. But if you screw that up, we're not going to be super mad. Whereas rules, you always have to stick to, because if you don't stick to the rule, then the rules become meaningless, and they're not rules, right? So if you set up rules, this is just hugely important. If a rule is a rule, 100% of the time, it was kind of awkward to bring it up, or, like we're buddies, I know it wasn't a thing. Like, nope, rules are rules, always. If you set a rule, that's the thing. And especially if you are like leadership or organizational or even just senior type, been around a long time, you need to create the type of environment that you want it to be, and you do that the best by modeling that ideal behavior for everyone. If you come in and you're doing things a certain way, if you tell people to do things a certain way and then you're not doing those things, that does not work very well. People are just like, yeah, okay, sure, we don't really care. And this is incredibly important because issues of harassment, inappropriate behavior, just Gamergate bullshit and all that kind of stuff is a problem. As much as we will say, and I agree that 99% of the professional community, at least, is super chill, super cool, really progressive, really nice. There are people who are not, especially people who may show up to something once and be like, "Oh, I'm going to come in. This is how it is." And so, setting those expectations very clearly, I think, is really important. Making it something that is super clear on your website. For us, it's one of the headline categories. It's something that we really try to put front and center because it establishes that we are a group that doesn't put up with that shit. And what's interesting is that you feel like, oh, maybe we're being too heavy-handed, but we get so many people that say thank you for doing this kind of thing. We get so many more people that feel comfortable coming in and joining the group because we have these clear policies that effectively just even saying, hey, we have a harassment policy, like that by itself is just like giant like sign that says like, oh, like we're not dicks. And one of the hardest things is to get people to show up, right? And the best way to get people to never show up again is to have a weird environment. And so setting these things down is just crucial. Tim, like what was your process for coming up with your policies? Was that kind of a committee thing? Was that a Tim, I just wrote a thing. Here he goes. How did you kind of come to that?
So that started when we really started formalizing the leadership structure for the group. We were like, we need to have some rules. There had been some, kind of rules. Some of them were unspoken, but it is very important that if you're going to have hard rules, that you have them written down. So if you have a website, put them on your website. Make sure that your members know that there are rules to the group. 100,000%, you need to be consistent with those rules. And as a member of leadership, you need to follow those rules yourself. So that way others don't hear that there just are rules out there, but they're kind of whatever. So we had, just when we had decided we needed to have a leadership group that ran the Game Makers Guild, a bunch of stuff kind of came into place. They had created, I was not part of that original leadership group, but they had created a charter, they created a mission for the group. They had created, that's when they created the curation process, but then they also created a whole bunch of rules and had them written down and formalized. And it was just the members of the leadership who they voted on who was going to be in the leadership too, but so there was that process as well. But really just putting the rules out there and then sending the rules to the group and saying, what do you think about these? Is there anything that we're missing? Is there anything that we're adding? Is there anything that we got wrong? And we, to this day, still go back through those rules periodically and take a look at them to just make sure that they are as updated as they can be. The most recent change that we made was actually to our curation process. We now call it rulebook playtesting instead of blind playtesting because, we felt that wasn't inclusive enough. So it's one of those things where you need to, if you're going to have those rules, you need to make sure that they're out there and you need to make sure that you're constantly looking at them and updating them and, addressing them when people aren't following them, but also just being critical about them. One other thing that I will say that we are really big on is that we have a safe space policy, and we have that posted up on our website as well. And because we are a little bit more formal, we have a start time to our meetings, and usually that's when we make announcements. We let people know about upcoming events and, celebrate the successes of some of our members and all of that. And the last announcement that I make before we break for games is we are a safe space. So if you see, hear, or play anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, let me know and I can help you address it or address it for you. We put that right out there, let them know that there's a policy on our website. So that way, if someone is not following those policies, the membership knows this is not welcome here and they can come find a member of leadership to address it. And you do find, especially now with a lot of groups going online, that you are getting members that are showing up that don't have the best of intentions and don't have the same goals that everyone else in the group has. And they just want to come in and, mess stuff up. And, you as a leader need to be mindful that there will be people who do that. And you need to know how you are going to address it.
Yeah, so leading into playtesting, I think something that is really important is the as creatives, we're really putting ourselves out there when we show you something at early stage, right? And especially when you're first growing in the industry, first kind of dipping your toe in the thing, it can be really scary to kind of put yourself out there like that. And a bunch of, grumpy, experienced people are going to tear your thing apart. There's a positive way to do that and a very negative way to do that. And so having that harassment, safe space stuff, that does set that also sort of like sideways sets a tone for the way that you're going to discuss playtesting and the way you're going to talk about things that are somewhat more benign in nature, but can still be just as difficult or emotionally fraught or whatever. And so something that we put a lot of time into more recently, especially, is having a really well-developed plan for how people should give feedback. This is guidelines, not rules, because of course there's fuzzy areas. So this is guidelines, and there's going to be exceptions and this and that. So I feel like this is a guideline, not a rule. But it's really, really important to establish what sort of stuff's going on there, what kind of boundaries you have. We push very hard, and I think everyone should follow this, that the designer showing off their work drives the playtest. That if it is their responsibility to lead off their playtest with, here's where the state of the game is, and here's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Because A, that sets a useful tone, but B, that's going to make it more functional and useful for everyone. We are very big on, if the designer didn't ask for this type of feedback, don't give it. If you're one turn in and you think something's stupid, keep it to yourself. Wait till the end of the game. Make notes if you have things you want to.
How many times do you play a game and you're like, this is dumb, and then by the end of the game you're like, oh, okay, I understand why that's a thing.
Exactly. And same thing with a lot of digital projects where it's like, oh, look, there's going to be bugs. I don't care if there's bugs. I want to see how the combat flows, or I want to see this or that. And if people don't say that, people are going to be like, oh, bug report. And it's like, yeah, I know, man, I know. That's not actually what I'm looking for. Or, oh, well, you should, what if it was a totally different game, right? You get that kind of situation, right? Yeah. And it's inevitable that even people with the best intentions, we get together and it's like, how do I shut, especially those of us that are professors and stuff, right? It's like, I need to shut the fuck up, because this is not a student. This is not a thing. I am here to support them, right? And that's establishing that mindset, I think, is just super important from the jump, especially because playtesting is such a central thing in design communities that, really create a positive, helpful atmosphere where people feel comfortable bringing in whatever they want, where people feel comfortable expressing what it is they're looking for in feedback, where people feel supported if they're like, hey, we're not really talking about that, so let's just move on. And that people that may have gotten a little excited about their feedback are conditioned to be like, oh, no, you're totally right. Yes, I apologize. I went off the rails. That's on me, not on you. And that has been just hugely, hugely helpful for us as we did learn somewhat the hard way that there was, we needed to be a little bit more clear about that. We needed to be a little bit more formalized. We needed to be a little bit more, heavy-handed in terms of establishing the way people interact with each other when, giving each other feedback.
Yeah. I'll say that is absolutely a guideline for us. I am a strong believer, and I think most of our group is a strong believer, that everyone has their own design process. And when they play test, we're going to play test according to their design process. We're not going to try to make them fit the mold of what I'm not going to try to make you design games the way that I design games, because you are a different person and my way of designing doesn't necessarily work for you. We actually had an issue come up couple of weeks ago, and we were discussing it in our leadership meeting, which is another thing that I'll throw out there. If you are going to have members who are leaders in your group, we do a monthly leadership meeting, and so meet at least once a month to just discuss the direction of what you're doing and any issues that come up. But it got brought up that we had a member who kept bringing a game and was making changes to it, but really wasn't listening to the feedback of the designers, wasn't making the changes that the designers were recommending or talking about. And so it came up of, do we address this with this member? And we settled on, this is his design process. And, maybe what they're saying at the end, maybe he's taking it and he's taking it in a little bit differently. Maybe he's paying more attention to his own feelings of how the game is being played. And he's making the changes that he thinks are important to the game, but he needs to have people to play test the game in order to make those changes. And, ultimately we're like, if this is his design process, this is his design process. And, we're not trying to force other people to say, you have to take all of the advice that members of our group give you and work it into your game. And so we are still here as a group, and this is actually a pretty successful designer. He's got a lot of games out there that are in multiple languages. Very, very, very successful designer. A lot of awards, and it's his design process. That's what works for him. But the other thing that I will say is, at the beginning of each of our meetings, the first announcement that I make, especially if there are new people, is I just talk a little bit about who we are. And so for Game Makers Guild, our motto is make games better. It's not make kick-ass games, not make awesome games. It's make games better. And the goal of what I tell everyone, the goal of what we're doing here is to look at games with a critical eye and to give feedback, so that way our designers can make their games better. And I have my own announcement that I make where I'm like, what you play tonight, it might not be fun, it might not be complete, it might not even be a game right now, but the goal is to look at these games with a critical eye and give feedback. And as you give feedback, to do it from a place of, I want to make this game better, and not I want to berate you for being a designer who chose to make a roll and move game.
Well, so I would even say that the way we conceptualize it even more beyond that is, better. We and this is perhaps me especially. Better is more in line with the designer's design goals for the project, right?
Absolutely.
It's not my attitude about what's better. It's not my idea of what is my taste or my opinion, because we don't know what their goals are, right? Like, maybe they want to pitch this game as a match 3 phone game, right? Maybe that's what they're working on. Great. Like, I'm not super keen on that, but you know what? Like, that's their goal. So how can we help that person achieve what it is they're looking for, right? And again, this is a designer who is presenting centric process. It's really not about my taste. It's, well, here's what I feel about it. Here's my experience. Take that information however you want to, and however is useful. And if you think my ideas are totally wrong, that's cool. I don't care, right? Like, that's, I'm just, we're there to give feedback, not to give direction, And so, this is, we're kind of hitting this same point over and over again, but like, this is one of I think the most foundationally important things to having a successful community, is where people come in and they feel like they got something out of it. They feel like they were supported. They feel like they weren't getting dogpiled by a bunch of people that didn't get what they were trying to do. They feel like they're getting, they're not getting this, like, oh, cool, like, I hate rolling moves. Let me tell you about why your game's stupid. It's like, well, you know what? My game is a rolling move. Like, or somebody comes in with a dice game, and people are like, I don't like dice games, but let me tell you what's wrong with your game. And it's like, well, that's not useful, right? And if that happens, people are not going to come back. People are not going to feel comfortable bringing their work in as much. People are not going to feel as comfortable bringing in those alphas or bringing in certain styles of games. And so, it's really, really easy for us as designers to want to say more, to want to apply our thoughts, to want to give our taste, our opinions, our whatever, and with no malicious intent. However, like, we really need to just continually hammer that into ourselves and everyone else, because when that becomes natural institutionalized behavior, that's when it just kind of happens and it flows, and other people feel all comfortable doing this, and you really start to fire on all cylinders in terms of being a really helpful resource for the community, because you're giving people what they want.
Yeah, and we do talks about this stuff as well as part of, to help grow our community as well. Best practices for playtesting, best practices for giving feedback, all of that. So that's just a way to kind of help, disseminate that kind of knowledge and that kind of attitude to the rest of the community. Because in the end, everyone does have a different design process, and you want to, as a playtester, I don't want to sit down. I personally don't want to sit down and play a game for an hour and then give you a whole bunch of feedback that you're not going to want to use, because that's a waste of both of our time. So, teaching your designers and your play testers, to be upfront about their goals and what they're looking for is just going to make it a lot more fruitful for everyone who's playing.
Another note is flipping that in the other direction, is inculcating an environment where designers have the attitude of like, oh, this isn't working, or I got what I need out of this. We don't need to finish it.
Yep.
Like, hey, we're 20 minutes into this game and I can already tell that it's a disaster and the game's going to take an hour. Well, just put it away. It's done. That's fine. Like,
yeah.
And because you have that attitude of support and caring, and they know they're going to get to come back and show it again. They know that they're going to be able to get supported and we're going to be with them through the process. They do feel more comfortable. And again, this is something we all need to do, is saying like, okay, yeah, this isn't really working. I'm just going to put it away. Like I'm recognizing, recognize when you're not getting out of it, recognize and respect everybody else's time is really important.
I've done that many times, and then I give the rest of my time over to another designer so they can work on their game and get something out of that time. So, sorry, go ahead.
I just noticed what time it is. So I'd like to open up for any questions people have. I do have one quick thing that I do want to throw out there because I put a note. This is another thing that we're reinstituting is a book club. So I think a book club is really fun. You should think about that. It's complicated on exactly how to do it, but pick a book a month and everybody read it or breeze through it, or an article, not necessarily a book, but having something that everybody could talk about at a meetup is great.
We're doing that. We're actually starting a Boston GMG library with game design books. So Kobold's Guide, awesome. That type of stuff. And we're just going to be passing those books around to each other. So that way, if you're like, oh, I heard this is a good book. Yeah, we got it. Here we go. So,
if anybody has specific questions, you can walk up to that little Q&A spot in the front, right over there.
This spot here.
If you don't have questions, we have plenty of other stuff to talk about, or we have other stuff we can talk about, rather. But it looks like maybe we got somebody. Maybe, yeah, there. Well, maybe.
One more. There we go.
All right. So hit us with the question. What do you got?
Aaron, you are muted, so make sure you unmute yourself. In the bottom right-hand corner, you should see your little image, and when you hover over it, you'll see the microphone.
Yeah. Hey, how do you keep your members engaged all year round, and do you have drop off, and how do you keep communication going with them? That's all.
Yeah. So right now, so because of COVID, we've actually started a Discord for the Game Makers Guild in Boston, and we share it with the Nashville group because they're super small, and that thing is constantly being used. We're constantly sharing articles and ideas, or just memes and joking around with each other, so everyone is staying engaged. But we have social media groups. We have a Facebook group that we were using pre-COVID where we could share stuff. We also just have members who like to get together and just do unofficial things. So either unofficial play tests or just get together and play board games, because we're board game designers, so we enjoy doing that. We have we call them unofficial events that happen, for some time up until COVID. We meet every other week, but there were some designers who wanted to meet every week. So they would go to a Boloco and they would come together and play test more often than the group as a whole would. We use, for the Boston Game Makers Guild, we use meetup.com. And that is where we post all of our upcoming meetups, as well as we do announcements. So we have a monthly newsletter that goes out and a quarterly newsletter that has bigger information that goes out there. And so we're using that to keep everyone engaged. Another big thing that Meetup allows us to do, which I would really push you all to do if you're looking at starting a community, is to have proactive outreach when new events come out. You can push something to your membership's email, or if they have the app, to their push notifications as well, to let them know, hey, we have a new event that's coming up in a couple of weeks. For me, I think the golden spot is 3 weeks. You push that new event out there 3 weeks before it happens, and that's really where I tend to find that you get the most engagement. But also an important thing, and this is I have kind of like my 5 tips that I give, but my number 1 tip is to be consistent. Be consistent with how often you meet. As well as a whole bunch of other things, but how often you meet. Find what that cadence is and what cadence works for your community and stick to it. And that's just going to keep people engaged, because they know that when they leave on Monday, in 2 Mondays, they're going to be able to come back again. And having that consistently, going every other Monday is what keeps people engaged. And a lot of our members just put it on their calendars. Every other Monday I have GMG, and they build that into their life.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's a lot of casual hanging out, talking to people, those sort of digital spaces. So, like the Facebook, the Discord. I think a lot of it can be tough when you're getting going, because you feel like you need to kind of kickstart it and talk more. And, it can take a little time before people start talking to each other, almost.
But it's worth it. Do it. It's worth it.
But in a non-forced way, I try to make sure that I'm posting something at least once a week, just to make sure that there's something happen, that there's a new thing. Something else that I find is really, really wonderful and really gets people fired up, and this, may or may not be relevant at this point for anybody else, is really celebrating the successes of members. Because it's so exciting to see something that you play tested 2 years ago, blowing up, coming out. It's really, really, wonderful. Something I do in all of the games we release, whenever I am allowed to put in a thanks section, I always thank New Haven Game Makers Guild. And I, it's 100%. I mean it 100%. Like it is absolutely a wonderful part and crucial to my process, or our process as a studio. And but it's little things like that, right? You want to make people feel like it is a cool community to be a part of, like there's something going on, and just talking to people, because, ultimately we are all happy to talk about what we do far more than we probably get to. Some of us that are like full-time and run a studio, I can get a little tired of it some days, but overall, most of your membership is going to be people who are just, this is a side hustle, or this is just purely a hobby, and they love having people to just talk about,
especially if they're new to it.
And especially, so if you kind of kick it off, or you can just kick it off a little bit and it'll start going, so like Tim said, consistency, keeping things moving, that's the way to, just be out there, put yourself out there, even if you're the only one making a post every week, like do it. Because then more people will start doing it. You can't just sit back and wait for other people to have conversations, and it can feel awkward. It can feel a little weird, but, power through it. When we first got started, sometimes 2 people would show up and it'd be like, well, I mean, we're still going to be here. We're still going to play test, still going to do the thing. You just kind of got to power through it.
And as you get new members, talk to them. Like, make it a point, especially if you're a member of the leadership, to like welcome them, talk to them about, don't even talk about game design. Just be like, hey, what games do you like? Oh yeah, I play that game too. Who's your main? What server you on? All that type of stuff. Just talk to them, make them feel welcome. I've definitely joined other groups where I get there and I don't know anyone and everyone's talking to each other and I'm an introvert. And you're going to find with game design, you do get a lot of introverts who show up and they're just going to kind of sit off in the corner. And unless you are the one who goes up to them to engage them first, they're not really going to come and join the group because they don't know anyone. And it's a really great way of isolating them. And that's the last thing that you want to do.
I just noticed that stuff happens at 3:00 and that this is like a bump right up against it. So thank you all so much for joining us. Yep. Tim, 10 seconds of pitching where people can find you.
You can find me, easiest way is on Twitter at Tim Makes Games.
Great. And that is, what is the website? Game Makers Guild?
GameMakersGuild.com. Yep. Great.
You can find us at newhavengamemakersguild.org because, you know, we're more serious, obviously. And you can find me randomly on the internet. I don't really social media. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Tim, for dropping all that wisdom. Thank you, Boston Festival of Indie Games, for having us and doing all the cool stuff. Stick around for Runaway Rummy Dinosaur. Sorry, I'm reading this more closely. This seems exciting, actually.